Is it quiet out there, or is it me? This is Alan with Quarter Horse Arms, and in this podcast I want to talk about, you guessed it, suppressors. Or silencers. A lot of people seem to use those terms interchangeably. The proper name is suppressor. Although on some ATF documentation they list it as a silencer. I have no clue why, but it doesn't really matter. The proper name is suppressor. You'll hear people call them silencers. A lot of people that own the silencers call them cans. Well, they're kind of can-shaped. No big deal. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that this is not Hollywood. This is not a video game. Suppressors do not eliminate the sound. They reduce it, and not by a whole lot. So, typically, at sound levels somewhere around 75, 85 decibels, I guess it depends on where you look, it starts getting uncomfortable and you're risking ear damage. One chart I found shows a shotgun blast at 160 decibels, fireworks at 145. Which, it's pretty loud and, repeated exposure can cause damage. Not to mention it's painful. And if it gets loud enough, you can blow your eardrums. So, why a suppressor? Well, for starters, they look cool. So you stick them on the end of a rifle, and or a pistol, and people are going to go, wow, you got a silencer. Well, yeah, but, they tend to be on the pricey side. And if you look at what a suppressor actually does, is lower the sound somewhere in the 25 to 50 decibel range. Which means the gunshot is still well over 100 decibels, maybe even somewhere around 120 decibels. It depends on the type of gun you're using. It depends on the type of silencer or suppressor, and it depends on the ammunition. Suppressors, really kind of reduce noise if you're using subsonic ammunition. So there are a lot of factors involved. But then it gets weird, because there's no standard for measuring sound or sound reduction when using a suppressor. And I found one research document where they were kind of comparing from different positions. And this was done for, I think, a U.S. Army or Marine Corps study, to determine, which suppressors work better with which, various types of weapons. And there's still no standard. In fact, GearReport.com was at one point working with a sound engineer grad student to try and come up with a standard that could be used across the industry. So, when a manufacturer says this reduces sound by 25 decibels, which, is a respectable noise reduction, how do you know how they measured it? I mean, you're never going to see a manufacturer claim that their suppressor reduces the sound almost as good as the other guys. And the suppressor manufacturers are not ripping you off. They set standards within their own company, but at this point, I haven't found anything that shows that they're working towards an industry standard. And I imagine, there could be a lot of reasons for that. One could be lack of interest, but another one could be, let's say you're making this claim that your suppressor reduces noise 50 decibels. And then there's an industry standard that's developed, and it says, well, you've only, dropped the noise level by 20 decibels. But you've already sold a bunch of those silencers. Are the customers that bought those suppressors going to be pissed off? And my guess is they could be. So, so why are silencers controversial? They're treated as a Class 3 weapon on the NFA, National Firearms Act. So to buy one, well, first you have to buy it. And second, you have to fill out paperwork. The ATF has what's called a Form 4. Submit fingerprints, photographs, and any other documentation that you need, depending on if you're doing it as a trust or whatever. And then you got to sit and wait for roughly 9 to 10 months these days. So if you're thinking about just buying one so you can go commit crimes and do it silently, number one, it's not going to be silent. And number two, you're going to be waiting the better part of a year before the ATF actually manages to process the paperwork. And most of that's because they just don't have the manpower to actually do all of the research, because they wind up background checking. So what does a suppressor get you? Well, like I said already, you get to reduce some noise. And for some people, especially as you get older, you're trying to protect your hearing. So for a lot of people that are out hunting, just reducing that level of noise is a good thing. And the other thing you have to consider is for the people that want to ban suppressors, they are essentially going to be discriminating against people who are legitimate gun and suppressor owners and are trying to preserve their hearing. So even if you're firing a suppressed weapon, you're still going to want to wear ear protection. Now, can small calibers like 22 caliber suppressors make a huge difference in noise reduction? The answer is yeah, you're still going to hear it. So let's go through some interesting data. All right, some people will claim that suppressors reduce accuracy. Well, there's something to be said for that. But there's also some claims that it improves accuracy. And the only thing I've seen, for example, at about 100 yards is maybe an inch deviation. However, that could be the way that the shooter was operating the weapon. And the other downside to it is those things heat up. And I mean, they get hot. So for a lot of people, you want to put a jacket on it so you can handle the suppressor while you're putting it on or, removing it. The other negative is as the suppressor gets hot, if you've ever noticed like a hot day looking at a road, or if you're looking, at sand dunes in the desert and you can see these heat waves coming up off of the ground, well, the same thing happens to the air around a hot suppressor. So you may actually get a slight distortion in your field of view. So while you're aiming, those heat waves might have an impact. And are suppressors really, really that controversial? That's a really good question. According to the ATF, about 1.5 million people own suppressors. All right, that's not the number of suppressors out there. That's the number of people that have them. And because it's an NFA item, so National Firearms Act, it's a Class 3 weapon, you have a bunch of paperwork and fingerprints and pictures to put out there. So they know who's actually got them legitimately. And then The claim they say there's about 44 suppressor related incidents or prosecutions. Honestly, I just can't remember which. And that works out to be, again, this is an ATF figure, 0.003% of the silencers ever get used in a crime. And it may not even be a crime, it's an incident. So, let's say you got caught with a weapon with a suppressor on the end, and you didn't have the proper documentation. So, if they're not really dangerous, again, why do people get a bug up their ass? Well, let's move up to more recent times. The mass shooting that took place in Virginia Beach. The shooter had both a legally acquired firearm and a legally acquired suppressor. Those are, kind of a rarity. Most of the crimes being committed are not done by legitimate gun owners. All right, so we have a mass shooting. And, of course, government people have to have a knee-jerk response, and we got to do something about it. Well, in part, they got to get reelected, so they're going to make it sound like, or actually do something. So it'll either sound like they're doing something or actually do something. Now, I don't mind stuff like that. It really bothers me when you have people who haven't got a freaking clue what they're talking about trying to pass laws. And, case in point is a U.S. Senator, Bob Menendez, from New Jersey, a Democrat. And he did a couple things, one of which was something I wholeheartedly agree with, which is he called silencers, and those are his words, an accessory. And if you actually go take a look at a suppressor, it doesn't actually shoot anything. It's something you attach to a firearm to reduce the noise level. So, if it's an accessory, I guess why treat it as a gun? But I'll come back to that. So, he said, he said a whole bunch of things. Number one is he said it's the sound of gunfire that alert you to danger. I'm not 100% sure that people will respond in the way he thinks they will with gunfire. Usually people are going to look around. Smart people will look around while they're on the ground or look over their shoulder while they're running. So he says that, and he said that more people would have lived if the gunfire was louder. In other words, the suppressor kept people from knowing it was dangerous. Funny thing is, he has absolutely no data to support this. And, why am I kind of going off on a rant about this hose head? The answer is, it's not that he's a Democrat, because I'm a Democrat. It's the fact that he's presenting information to sensationalize it, and he doesn't know jack shit about what he's talking about. At least educate yourself if you're going to put yourself out there. So, did they call anybody that was an expert, or did he call anybody? If he did, it wasn't posted in in any of the news documents I read. The other thing about it was, if he did call some experts, and I'm using air quotes with that now, and obviously you can't see me, but if he called the experts in, were those experts people with other screwed up opinions like him? Or filled with misconceptions because they heard what somebody else said and took it as the gospel? So if you remember or recall that Suppressors reduce the noise. They do not eliminate it. And yes, you can hear them. Do I think having an